As we shift our focus now over to the grain markets, this week we were joined by Darin Fessler of Lakefront Futures and Options. The end of July featured a run-up in prices for the grain market, but August has thus far dampened that rally. That is where we began the discussion with Darin on Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, I think the key theme so far this week has been obviously with Pelosi visiting, Taiwan. And how China has been talking with the U.S., hey, don't do this. And so there's that tension between U.S. and China. And I really think that it's been a risk off because of that. It's not necessarily because of the weather. We know the weather has been hot. It's been dry. Yes, there's been some showers in the middle parts of this week that started to show up across Iowa and Illinois. But the question is, if these don't really materialize in a much greater aspect, like Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois don't see much greater rains, then you really start questioning whether the USDA is right on this 51.5. With the balance sheet as tight as it is, even a bushel or two difference makes a world of difference at the end of the day with that balance sheet. Question with that is, what's that relationship with China and U.S. moving forward, given that Brazil is probably going to have or plant a pretty darn good crop here just in a month's time?
I was going to ask you about this Taiwan situation a little bit later in the program, but you mentioned it, so let's just talk about it now. How concerned are you that trip is going to sour the relationship between the U.S. and China long term?
I'm very on edge about that, simply because of the relationship with China and Brazil. And now that Brazil has really come into the picture over the last 10, 15 years with their exports of beans and now corn, it really puts maybe our prospect or at least our outlook on U.S. exports kind of in question here. That's why I've said on social media here, we really need to depend on this domestic demand more and more each year. But I'm really on edge. It makes me a little bit nervous if we do start to see some cancellations of these beans, even though we may not have that yield, even though that the perception that the balance sheet may get tighter, does that get offset with cancellations if this relationship, like you said, does sour?
Something to watch there. Let's stay with some global issues. Ukrainian grain is being shipped for the first time since, I believe, February. What kind of impact do you think that'll have on our domestic prices here?
Well, it comes along with the wheat market. It's been in this down drop for a while. It doesn't seem like there's any interest at this moment to own it from a fund standpoint. Now, the Ukrainian Agmin was out here this week. They were saying, their crop is 65 to 70 million metric tons. That's greater than what they had previously thought. Again, just adding more pressure to this market. Again, you're going to have give the funds a reason to buy it. Even though we are very oversold, you got to give them the reason to buy it. And with Ukraine moving more grain, regardless of what that quality may be or may not be, it still puts pressure on this market.
Back here in the U.S., it's obviously a weather market that everybody's keeping an eye on right now. You mentioned scattered rains. Seems like where the crops are good, they're great, but where they're not good, where you've missed the rain, things are not looking pretty right now, right?
No, they have. I would say in general, all the customers I have in Iowa looks fairly good. I mean, Iowa usually does look good. It doesn't take much rain like it would in Nebraska. Iowa looks good. Now, how do they look in 2 weeks if they don't get these needed rains? That's a big determining factor. I think that a lot of things pollinated fine in Iowa. It's just what comes to the test weight. How does that grain fill happen? Now, Illinois looks relatively good. I think there's areas of Minnesota look really phenomenal, but there's pockets. Just like, the pocket of southwest Nebraska, it is not good. It is worse than 12 in those areas. But how does Nebraska perform given there's a lot of hail, there's a lot of late plant? I drove through some areas on Highway 6 that looks great. It hasn't tasseled yet. So I think still Nebraska is going to be the wild card for the whole U.S. national corn yield debate.
If somebody has not been pricing in new crop, I'm sure they've got some questions at this point whether they've got a good crop or a bad crop, frankly. Either way, if somebody has gotten some of those late rains are sitting pretty good, where are you recommending they should be on selling that?
If you get December corn back towards the 630, 650, and you know that you feel like there's a good crop out there, utilize some HTAs, or if volatility starts popping up in some of these options, look to sell some premium, look to sell some calls against that physical bushels. If we get to these levels, you want to unload with some HTAs. And same thing with the bean market. Even though that the balance sheets are tighter here, it's still that aspect of do we move these exports? I think the exports are the big side of things with this balance sheet. And if we do happen to see some cancellations, why not utilize some call options? If you're selling the premium, you know you're going to be selling much higher levels against that physical if you feel like the crop is out there in your field.
When you look at these markets and all these factors, it's kind of a stressful time for producers. What kind of recommendations do you have to them, not knowing where the crop is going to be here a month and a half out still before anybody gets in the fields?
You know, instead of actually selling like on an HTA or selling the forward or selling cash, I always go by, keep it safe for the time being. Keep yourself very, very flexible. Utilizing options are a good way of doing that, not just simply buying the call or buying the put. You want to be buying options with low volatility. Right now, volatility is somewhat a little bit higher, so you probably want to be looking to buy puts and sell puts in what is called a put spread. But, just keep yourself flexible in this market until you really know. If you've been missing these rains, it's very, very difficult to go out there and sell physical bushels. And that's been a challenge this whole year, is just the marketing aspect of things. You had Russia, Ukraine, you have inflation, and now you have weather. It puts a lot of pressure on the producer of what to do with the markets.
Final word is yours this week. What's happening in these markets? Maybe something that not everybody's talking about that you've been keeping an eye on.
At the outside markets, I think the outside markets are a big wild card here. You're seeing a lot of correlations. Not that we're exactly like 2008, but the U.S. consumers putting more debt on their credit cards, or paying those things off slower. The housing supply is starting to rise. Housing prices are finally starting to go down. I think this recession that we're in is going to get deeper, and I think that obviously at the end of the day spills over into the ag sector.